that I will mention. A couple others that I will mention here include NASA's Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium. So if anybody here is looking for resources to get more involved in STEM and spread knowledge through open communication, I think that these are a lot of really important tools that can be utilized. An important part of getting people engaged into STEM is thought and a discussion. And these kind of consortiums are the place that make these conversations happen. And it can range from very, very technical discussions like understanding excavation properties of lunar resources or understanding position, navigation, and timing, all the way to some of the more simple concepts such as how can we integrate better STEM curricula in our high schools. So I think having these kind of conversations and joining these consortiums, and there's many more out there that are open science and free to join, that you can become engaged in, become part of an important conversation. And in doing so, we expand our ability to develop our capabilities in STEM and to spread that knowledge and engage the next generation. Last one that I will kind of focus on here today, and I will actually jump to the next slide for that, is something called Zooniverse. So a lot of people aren't too familiar with that, maybe a couple of you are, but Zooniverse is an open source education platform that allows you to actually engage in science as it's happening. So this isn't limited to just space, it's all of STEM, even some social sciences too, and art. So if you're into STEAM, this is a great platform to check out. Zooniverse, in my past experience, I've done work with them that has been for data analysis for the European Space Agency, NASA, Canadian Space Agency, CERN, and so many other STEM-focused organizations that are both public and private. A reason that I recommend these kind of platforms to early career professionals and also to subject matter experts who are looking just to boost some of their soft skills is not only is this a fun and rewarding activity to be part of, but it's open science. I keep using the word open science a lot, and that's going to be, I think, a cornerstone in today's presentation, mainly because I want to communicate how important it is to break down barriers in science. I know for a lot of us who are career professionals who made an actual industry career out of being in STEM, if you're a scientist, if you're a doctor, it was a long pathway for you to get to where you are right now. Clearly, that path is very difficult and daunting for youth who are trying to get involved in STEM for the first time and they don't have direction. A lot of them don't have access to mentorship and they don't know where to go. So I want to reaffirm that having open science tools and platforms where you can communicate with people, where you can be engaged in lifetime STEM projects, not only does it boost your resume, increase your knowledge, but it also helps you improve your confidence and your ability to perform in different areas of STEM where you otherwise may not have had the opportunity. And just a quick note, I did see in the comment that somebody asked if I can share the presentation via link. I will do that after I conclude the presentation so that everybody can have a copy of it if they so choose. Talking about open science specifically for early career professionals and how we in the STEM industry can help give back to that community, it serves as an invaluable resource, offering opportunities to collaborate on interdisciplinary projects and really enhance our ability to communicate and develop teamwork skills with youth in STEM and help them explore the many, many diverse research areas involved in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, thereby fostering a more holistic development and refining career interests. I know that open science and being able to have mentorship directly from people who are in STEM is the cornerstone of how youth discover where they want to place themselves in science. And I've heard many success stories from early career professionals, and that's people ages average 16 to 25 who've had hands-on learning with mentors, advisors, and people who've been industry leaders for at least 10 years, have credited these interactions with their ability to be able to pick and choose what in STEM they wanted to focus on and help build a career out of it. Additionally, just circling back to open science again, is that these open science platforms provide a platform specifically for youth to showcase their work and receive constructive feedback from a global audience. Now, feedback is essential in refining your ability to learn, It helps improve presentation, critical thinking skills, and allows for greater international collaboration. And moreover, does the transparent nature of being able to work in open science promotes accountability and integrity, instilling ethics into STEM principles and research practices early in youth careers. I think that establishing ethics in open science is not talked about enough. And in order to effectively mitigate some of the challenges that are associated with actually going into STEM as a career, is to be able to effectively understand what you need to do to boost your ethical awareness, how you use best practices, how you use research responsibly. And these experiences working with mentors and working with open science prepare the next generation for the demands of the STEM workforce, while also simultaneously instilling a sense of belonging and empowerment within the science community. Just at the bottom of the screen here, I shared a couple of my top resource picks and recommendations. If you're looking for some great open science and low barrier entry areas to get involved with both public and private agency. So as I mentioned, Zooniverse is a great platform. NASA Pathways is a great program if you're a young career professional wanting to get into internships with the government. Specifically, one that I like to discuss that not a lot of people talk about is something called NSPIRES. That's the NASA Solicitation and Proposal Integrated Review and Evaluation System. Now, a lot of people hear the word NASA and they think it's restricted to US citizens only. And if you're living in Europe, if you're living in Asia, anywhere else, you don't have the opportunity to work for NASA because there are restrictions. Well, NSPIRES is one of these sub-organizations of NASA that actually helps break down those barriers and allow for international collaboration. NSPIRES is where I started my career at NASA, and what it is principally is an open science area of their platform that allows you to go in there, understand what science and technology is being developed for Science Technology Mission Directorate activities. So that is ranging everything from earth science instrumentation to AI systems that are being developed for software that's going to go on to onboard computing systems for the ISS, all the way up to taking a look at what robotic systems are being developed for cislunar, lunar, Martian, and other planetary applications in space. So I encourage people here in this audience to, if you don't know about some of these platforms like NSPIRES, maybe that's something that you want to check out because it's an incredible opportunity to boost your career skills. There are a great consortium of individuals who are involved in those kind of programs, and I'm talking about people who've been in the industry for over 40 years to people who are coming at it just fresh out of university. So it's a great area where I think I've seen a lot of great international collaboration with NASA, and it's an excellent place. You can sign up for it. It's free to join. And if you sign up for their mailing list, every time there's an opportunity to be part of what's called a review panel, you can sign up for it. If you get selected, you have the opportunity to work hands-on with program managers who are developing go to space. And conversely, you will be able to actually input what you think the intrinsic merit, relevance, and feasibility of developing these technologies are. So I will leave this here on the screen if anybody wants to take a screenshot. And again, I will share a copy of this presentation afterwards. One other source that I would like to point out is education. So having the ability to use platforms like Udemy, Coursera, Lynda by LinkedIn, GitHub, and direct university programs is another great source of outreach. So having access to education platforms is another useful area where I do not think there's enough representation for youth in STEM. Having access to education platforms allows you, again, similar to open science, allows you to build soft and hard skills and to have a greater amount of confidence in the area that you're working in. So something that I like to recommend, no matter if you're in the industry, if you've been in there for 20 plus years, or if you're just new to the game, is take a course in something that is new and refreshing and something that you want to dive into. If anything, that knowledge comes back and helps you later down the road. I know myself personally, being involved in the STEM industry, I've always had a passion for learning and wanted to boost education. I think if you're in the STEM industry and you don't want to learn, then you're probably in the wrong field. STEM is all about iterative and continuous learning, and the ability to capitalize on that and contribute to that community and give back to that community is built on the principle of education. So I just wanted to share a couple of these resources with all of you. These are great recommendations in my personal opinion. Perhaps some of you have a bit more. We can jump into that later in the presentation during Q&A. Now I want to focus on understanding why early career professionals are well suited for STEM. And I want everybody to stop and think, why do we feel the next generation is going to be even better than the generation that's currently in STEM? I want to focus on 4 key principles: resilience, resourcefulness, adaptability, and advocacy for change. So something that has been documented in international studies when comparing how youth in STEM, and I'm talking about, again, that age group of around 16 to 25. Oh, excuse me there. My presentation just disappeared, excuse me. Okay, excellent. So why I want to discuss why early career professionals are well suited for STEM, again, going back to that age category of 16 to 25, is there's been an increased amount of resilience, resourcefulness, adaptability, and advocacy among that age group compared to more seniors in space. Youth are exhibiting more resilience in being able to navigate complex challenges. And in this realm that we're in, I think it's very much high-powered with balancing technology, academic pressures, work-life demands, more so than it has been in past generations. And this future generation that's now entering the ring of STEM is becoming more resourceful, more adaptable, and better at communicating and advocating for more inclusion in initiatives to address systematic issues and create more equitable opportunities for underrepresented groups in STEM. I know these days we're seeing a lot more opportunities for underrepresented groups, for women in STEM, for LGBTQ community. Being able to rapidly adapt and advance technological projects and evolve within the industry landscape is a key feature of youth in STEM, and us being able to recognize that and foster that and create a greater consortium of understanding and recognition, and most importantly, appreciation for how these youth are handling going into such a complex and challenging industry with such grace and motivation and perseverance is really, really a keystone to what the future is going to look like in space science, earth science, and anything that involves science, technology, engineering. So I know a few of you may be familiar with the concept of STEAM. So again, that's STEM, but just with the addition of art, STEAM. Something that has come into the framework when we're talking about youth in STEM is something that is called STEM. So 2 E's, STEEM. Science, technology, engineering, engagement, and mathematics. That is the new term that youth in the science sector are using. And they added that extra E in there to actually break down more barriers, and kind of conversely coming back to what I've been discussing here with all of you today is engaging that community, breaking down barriers, promoting resiliency and advocacy for change. That's what makes us capable of transforming our perspective on how these industries are being built, how challenges are being solved, and how technologies are being manufactured on a global scale, on a local scale, on industrial or technological. There's so many different perspectives that come into factor here when we're talking about how youth are being engaged in STEM. And I believe that it's our responsibility as professionals in this industry to recognize that and continue to foster that. Continuing on here, a couple of other points on why I feel that the next generation is essential to the future of STEM, and moreover, how we can continue to engage them and foster that participation is in 4 key categories: innovation, advocacy for inclusivity, understanding and appreciating digital natives, and offering mentorship and support. So something that I've been saying here today, and I'll reaffirm this here on the screen, is that youth bring fresh perspectives and innovative ideas to STEM fields that drive technological advancement and push boundaries. Moreover, diversity and inclusivity in STEM, with the promotion of equal opportunities for all aspiring professionals, is a firmly held belief within that category. And also another thing to take note of, and maybe this is one of the better reasons that youth are becoming more involved in STEM than previous generations, is that they are digital natives. They grew up in the age of technology. When they were kids, iPads were already a thing, or they were just starting to be developed. Personal computers were commonplace. Leveraging technology, understanding how digital tools work to solve complex challenges is one of the reasons that young professionals are being easily integrated into high-powered areas of STEM. It's the reason that it takes less time for them to become acquainted with certain methods, with certain fields, and with certain ways that organizations solve problems, is because they grew up in this technological era where they had access to these kind of tools. Essentially, they had smartphones, or they had access to laptops, and they learned from an early age how to use these digital tools to solve challenges in the academic setting, and then they were able to translate that into a professional setting quite easily, which makes them more adept at being part of the STEM industry. Last but not least, I want to reaffirm that youth seem to be more adept at wanting mentorship and support. They want that assistance. They want to hear from people who've been in the industry for decades. They want inclusive environments, they want resources, and they will actually use it. They're listening, they're amplifying the voices of their fellow young professionals, and they are actively seeking out areas in which they can improve themselves. And the only way that we can continue to foster that is to keep offering those kind of opportunities to them, and to be able to effectively kind of coalesce youth in STEM. It is our responsibility as career professionals to be able to offer them that mentorship and support. I want to give a quote insight, and I want this to stick in the back of the minds of everybody who's here listening today. STEM is built upon the foundation of collaboration. By fostering innovation and breaking down barriers, we set the precedent for our global future. Think about that for a second. Think about what STEM means to you. Think about what collaboration, teamwork mean to you. And think about how your career in STEM has shaped you as a person, and how you feel that in your years, you have given value back to your community. You wouldn't have been able to do this unless you had opportunities. And in order for us to effectively promote that next generation of STEM and help them to become even better than who we are as people, is to be able to essentially set that precedent by engaging them, by giving opportunities, by doing everything in our power to be part of that consortium that's actively looking to seek them out, help them, be a resource for them. If somebody in your organization is coming to you younger than you, they want to learn something, don't shut them out. Be part of the change that you want to see for your industry. I want to now focus on a couple of areas of expertise that youth can use to kind of grow their topic interest in this field. So this is all about growing your STEM career with tangible milestones. And I say the word tangible with a caveat, because how do we measure what's tangible and what is not? I feel that depending on what area of STEM you want to focus on, for example, comparing mathematics to engineering, though they are similar in principle, their fields and their real world experience are quite different. If you're a mathematics major and you're looking to get into the industry, maybe you want to go work for a firm that has nothing to do with STEM. Maybe it's going to be focused on accounting. Whereas if you're in engineering, it's a direct link to construction or aerospace or aviation, or something that is directly involved in STEM, or more so something that you would characterize as kind of your stereotypical STEM-like career. Now, when I say tangible milestones, I think an important thing for us to focus on is, we don't have to actually focus on one thing or the other being the right or wrong answer. And in order to effectively figure out what a milestone is, how to achieve it, how to grow, how to hit the next milestone as a career professional in STEM, is to be able to do 5 things. Certain pathway, you don't have to do this in a specific order, But my personal advice is to use these 5 focus areas to really develop yourself. And I say this not only to youth in STEM, but also as career professionals and people who have been in this industry for a long time. There's never, ever any time that you shouldn't be continuing to want to learn. So step number 1, in my opinion, is to refine your focus area and discover the field that interests you and correlate this with your education and career goals. After that, the next best thing that you can do is research the complementary organizations and resource bases that can help you get more involved in your topic of interest. So going to subject matter experts, seeking out consortiums like some of the ones that I shared in the presentation earlier that are dedicated to your research and your topic area of interest. These are where you start to have really important conversations and gain a new perspective and really understand if this is something that you want to dive into, if you want to make a career out of it, or if you want to treat it as a hobby, it's something that you can dive into and learn about a little bit more. Next is to educate and to grow. And I don't think that we ever really leave this phase. I think for as long as that you're in the STEM industry, you're always going to continue educating yourself. You're always going to continue to grow. And every time a research is published in your field or in a field that you're interested in, you're going to focus your educational path and your career path towards learning continuously. Focusing on the fields that you wish to shape into a lasting career is built on that same principle of education and growth. And you can only effectively do this if you're engaged in your community, if you're seeking out opportunities, and you have that open mindset. If you're in STEM, you cannot have a closed mindset. You have to always be open to learning from iterative challenges, to growing, to accepting new knowledge when it makes sense to do so. And that ties into my next point, which is to seek challenging opportunities. So in converse to education and research and understanding the areas of STEM that interest you, particularly for early career professionals and youth in STEM, what you can do to boost your own personal recognition, create a brand for yourself, if you will, is to apply for challenges, competitions, speeches, and community events where you're allowed to showcase yourself and engage in learning sessions that can boost your industry recognition. So for example, I'm here today presenting with all of you because I wanted to boost both my personal understanding of youth in STEM and really kind of give a presentation that characterizes, how youth in STEM are changing the next generation in this field and how we can give back to that community and how we can engage them. But moreover, I'm also here to build a personal brand for myself. And that extends to everybody, no matter if you've been in this industry for a long time or if you're an early entrant, seeking out challenging opportunities and applying for things, even if you're not sure if this is the right thing for you, you're not sure you can get in, do it anyways. Have no fear, have confidence, have strength and perseverance and motivation, and become part of a community that's fostering that kind of open innovation and that kind of engagement, because at the end of the day, being part of an organization that's focused on expanding knowledge and giving back to the community, that's what's going to solve challenges in STEM. It is not by restricting ourselves and saying, maybe I can, maybe I can't. It's about getting out there, putting yourself out, getting your name out there, and understanding the industry that you're working in and how you can be a better steward to your community. And then again, this ties into my very last point, which is giving back to your community. Commonplace thing, but it goes without saying, taking learned knowledge and developing an internal framework that helps like-minded individuals grow within this field, and conversely, taking that internal framework and implementing it into everything that you do, into everything that you are as a person. That is how you grow. That is how you continue to boost awareness in your field. It's how you welcome the next generation into it. And it's how you solve the challenges that are basically building up barriers. You cannot help like-minded individuals grow if you're not giving back to your community. So if you have been in this industry for a few years or a few decades and you want a community, I recommend, there's so many youth out there that are wanting to get involved in STEM, they don't know where to go. If you have an opportunity within your organization to coach and mentor people who are just coming on board your team, or if you're closely involved in your local community, maybe you can contribute through going to schools, giving presentations about the consortiums and organizations that you're involved in, and really just seeing how are the youth responding to it? How are they trying to grow themselves in this field? And is there something that you can do with your expertise that's going to help them along their journey? So now talking about a couple of other things, and that's challenges, processes, and applications, because as much as we talk a great game about youth in STEM, there's a lot of challenges that go into building a career in this field. Now, we've talked about this, I think, in this presentation with a little bit of rose-colored glasses. We say, okay, you get into your industry if you persevere hard enough and you keep learning that everything's going to work out. Well, that's not always the case. And the reason that a lot of youth are dropping out of STEM or they're becoming less involved in STEM is because it's tedious. Now, there is a figure that states, and it was done by the Government of Australia back in 2019 through 2021. It's a study on how youth in STEM, particularly girls in STEM, were dropping their interest from ages 13 to around 30. Year over year, there was around an 8% decrease in interest in STEM. And that led to less students going into STEM fields, less students turning their learned knowledge into a career. And the reason for this is because it is a very tedious and complex industry to be part of. And a lot of organizations, especially government organizations, but also a lot of private ones too, they make it really challenging to be able to turn visionary ideas into realistic goals and to become part of a conversation. An essential part to breaking down these barriers is to understand how this red tape works and how we can work around it or break it down. Balance and determination are key qualifying traits to retain in order to successfully sustain long-term growth. So again, if you have balance and determination, and you have iterative learning, and you have a motivation to want to be part of this industry, then you can use those tools and resources that you have in front of you to help break down barriers within your organization and understand what you can do to help engage other young career professionals who are facing some of these same challenges. Youth are transforming the STEM field with a revolutionary approach to research and entrepreneurship. I want to focus on that term, research and entrepreneurship, because there's two really key differentiators between being a researcher and being an entrepreneur in STEM, and they come from two very different perspectives. I've been personally in both sides of the same area. I've been on the research side, I've been on the entrepreneurship side. I feel that being able to have youth involved in either side of that equation is what's really building up our ability to move fast in this industry. You look back 10, 20 years ago when there was less youth involved in STEM and it was taking longer to get things done. The reason that we have, I'd say, even especially in the space sector where I focus a lot of my efforts, the reason that we're growing so fast in this industry, that we're talking about getting humans back to space on a permanent basis, is we're doing this because of the fact that youth are becoming more involved in STEM. They're having internship programs, they're solving challenges, they're coming up with research, and they're applying it towards business. They're solving technology gaps, and they're starting businesses that allow them to service organizations and government industries and help them close the technology gaps that they just didn't have time to solve. And I think that an important part of having youth engaged in STEM is that they're so motivated. They are so eager to solve these challenges, and they have that passion, that time, that determination, and that thirst and hunger for learning more. And having them be a part of the STEM industry and nurturing that kind of thought process is how we're continuing to build ourselves up as an industry. And moreover, we're getting better opportunities for STEM to become engaged with youth, and conversely, youth to be engaged in STEM because of the fact that they're actually going out there, putting themselves out there and trying to engage themselves in research and entrepreneurship as it relates to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So again, to kind of conclude that part, is there are challenges, there are processes that you have to go through as an early career professional to be able to be part of this industry, but there are numerous applications to where you can find your footing. And by doing that research and engaging with your community, and moreover, again, for people who have been in the STEM field for years and years, giving back to those youth and engaging them in your area of expertise is how you continue to foster that global participation. So concluding kind of the bulk of my presentation, and this builds upon what I was saying previously, is how trends, data, and supporting research are looking at youth in STEM and early career professionals in this field. Researchers under the age of 31 account for upwards of 34% of the STEM industry in North America. And 62% of girls and 64% of boys internationally were surveyed and shown to have an interest in science. And that was as of 2021. They wish to pursue knowledge in STEM as part of their education goals in high school and post-secondary. So 62% and 64%, those are relatively positive numbers. And being able to continue fostering that desire for knowledge is how we build a very, very empowered workforce. And we solve very practical challenges too. It doesn't even have to necessarily go back to getting humans to space or coming up with the next water purification system for your city. STEM has so many different translational concepts, and it ties into so many different fields. It ties into social sciences, it ties into art, it ties into your standard blue-collar industry work. There's so many things that trace back to STEM, and by fostering that international participation with early career professionals allows you to really understand, wow, take a look at what these youth are coming up with. If we can foster their participation, take a look at what our society is going to become. A last thing here, and I will end on a slightly less positive note. And again, this is coming back to the women in STEM facing adversaries guarded by gender, causing them to lose interest in being part of this field. So women in STEM account for around 18% of the workforce right now. That's less than 1 in 5, and they are facing challenges being engaged in that community. And again, as I mentioned earlier, year over year, there's an average of 8% loss of interest in pursuing science as a career for women between the ages of 13 and 25. We need to stop this number dead in its tracks, and we need to reverse it. We need to create more opportunities for underrepresented groups, and we want to be able to foster community participation. I talk about youth in STEM. Yes, it's important to have inclusivity for everybody, but I really want to hone in on women in STEM, underrepresented groups, minorities, ethnic communities that haven't had access to these kind of resources in the past. It is our responsibility as people in this industry, as professionals, to break down this barrier, to say enough is enough. We need to be the generation that accounts for change. So to close out this presentation, I want each and every one of you to stop and think and really take this to heart and integrate this into your mind's eye and think about this on a long-term basis. How can we take some of the lessons that were learned here today? How can we take what we're doing in our careers and propel it towards the future initiatives of young career professionals in STEM? What can we do as individuals? Because it's challenging. It's challenging as one person to be able to actually make an impact, but there are things that we can do to help boost that awareness and that recognition. So, and I will say this to everybody, please listen, please become part of this conversation. Don't just let this be some presentation that you listen to. Take heart, take heed, take notice, and then take action. To foster increased STEM participation in youth, we need to provide early exposure through hands-on learning, mentorship, showcasing diverse role models, and promoting community engagement and collaboration amongst schools, businesses, and organizations. STEM as a field is mostly divided within 3 different, very separate areas: academia, government, and private industry. So that's a business, and I can be talking about a small business like the one I'm working in, Space Copy, or a large business like Lockheed Martin, or a school like an academic facilities, that's high school, if that's post-secondary, and organizations like the United Nations, like government space agencies. All of these different sectors of STEM have been historically known to be very separate from each other, and they haven't wanted to work together very much in the past. But now, with the new generation of STEM kind of coming into the framework, there seems to be a greater opportunity for us to capitalize on how to engage academia, industry, and government to be able to create better opportunities for youth. How we can give back to this as individuals, however, is to focus again on these three principles. And I want us to actually take note and remember just these three. If you take anything away from today's conversation, and just let it be that early exposure and hands-on learning, diverse role models and mentorship, and community engagement and collaboration are the three areas that we can personally contribute to helping youth become greater participants in the STEM fields, and how we can help give back to our community and engage them in fields where they wouldn't have had opportunities. I can say for myself personally, I wouldn't be in the STEM field unless I had people who were mentoring me. When I started at NASA, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to focus my research on. I just thought that I was along for a really fun adventure. And somewhere along the way, I got to talk with a couple of guys who were in geophysics, for example, and they coached me on the principles of lunar science. And it was really, really complex area to try and dive into. There was a lot of tedious going back and forth. Should I pursue this? Should I not pursue this? But it is because of the fact that I had mentorship, hands-on learning experiences, the ability to work on open source projects, work with open science, and engage with a community who's been in the industry for a lot longer than I have, that I actually decided to turn this into a career. And I think that the same thing can be spoken for anybody who is wanting to engage in STEM. There's so much interest, and there's so many people who want to participate, and it's coming in from a very, very early age. We were talking about children who are still in elementary school, who have an interest in science, but they don't know where to go. Having access to mentorship and actually being part of the conversation, going to events virtually or in person, giving speeches, talking with people individually, talking with these youth, understanding what their goals are, what they want to do, what their challenges are, where they feel they need the most help, and then seeing what you can do as an individual to assist them is what is completely going to transform the game of how early career professionals are integrated in the STEM industry. We can only do that with mutual participation. It is a global endeavor. We can only foster that kind of community participation if we get the ball rolling ourselves. So again, as a key takeaway from today's conversation, I just want each and every one of you to just take a moment and think, what can I do to make an impact? If you're heading out of this community, maybe you're retiring, maybe you've been in this industry for many, many years and you want to transition to a different area. Before you go, who is in your organization that you feel could be mentored? Who is within your community that you feel could be mentored? What do you think their challenges are? And how do you think that your knowledge base could be useful for them? And it's a lot of iterative learning and discussions. That's what makes progress. Being part of that conversation, again, that's what's important here. So I encourage every single one of you, again, take away from today's conversation is to become part of that conversation, become part of that community, and stop at nothing. To be able to become both a better, more educated individual and pass that knowledge on to the next generation through continuous learning and improvement. So that concludes kind of my side of the discussion. I hope that each and every one of you have learned something from today's talk, and that it has given you something to think about, or perhaps even changed your perspective on how you view early career professional and youth integration within the STEM industry. More than anything, though, I hope that at least one of you comes away from today's conversation thinking about what they can do best, what you can do best to help promote that kind of inclusivity. So I want to say thank you so very much for allowing me to be here to speak about a topic that is so important to me. And if you would like to learn more about the initiatives that I'm working in, I encourage you to reach out to me. My email is here on the screen. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you want to scan that QR code and see more about what I'm developing as Space Copy, then I encourage you to do so as well. And again, I will share this presentation afterwards. And now I would like to open up the floor. If anybody wants to have a longer discussion, or if you have some questions that you'd like to ask and answer, please do so. Otherwise, we will wait till the next participant begins. Thank you so much.
Hey, Madison, that's great, great stuff. Thank you. Great, information. One thing I've seen in talking to youth and to teachers is that, especially students once they get into middle school, they don't see themselves as being a fit for STEM, or they stereotype a STEM career as a scientist in a lab coat working in a cubicle. And they don't realize that science is collaboration, it's team, it's team-based, project-based learning. Have you seen that similar kind of thinking or experience in schools?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think back to when I was a student in middle school and high school, and there weren't a lot of opportunities for youth to understand, what STEM really meant.
Yeah.
I think there's like that stereotype, and maybe it's a little bit of credit to maybe youth watching too many Bill Nye science videos where they think that, the only thing that you can do to be involved in STEM is to be, wearing that white lab coat and working in a facility putting together chemicals, and that's what STEM is. Or it's becoming a doctor and working in a clinic. That's what STEM is.
Yeah.
And unless you are smart enough to be a rocket scientist, then it's not for you. Well,
Right.
it's just not true.
Yeah.
And I think a really important principle, and maybe this is something that can be greater put into the education system, maybe teachers can be part of this conversation as well, is in order for us to effectively break down those stereotypes of what STEM really is to have actual STEM professionals come into schools and give presentations and have conversations and show active demonstrations of what STEM really is and what it looks like on a daily basis. And one more thing that I'll just add to that conversation is having more field trips and more opportunities for students to actually be on site at a STEM facility. So when I say STEM facility, that can mean so many different things. If you have the privilege of being nearby an area where, say, space technology is being developed, for example, and you have the opportunity to send students over there, that's great. That's one thing. Maybe you can survey students who are in middle school and high school and see what their interests are and try to build opportunities around that, build like field trips and mentorship opportunities around those specific areas and have them go visit locations where these kind of activities are taking place. And actually seeing it firsthand is what allows students to really understand, okay, this is not what I thought it was. This is more diverse. There's more opportunity here. And again, I'll just close out by saying it comes back to mentorship. The only thing that we can do as professionals in this industry to help break down that barrier is to actually sit there, to talk it out with youth and figure out, what are their misconceptions and how can we correct that?
Yeah, Oren.
Raised hand,
there?
Oren.
Hold on, I'm here.
There you are.
Hi, Ron.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was quite useful. As a STEM pioneer, I had a theoretical mathematics degree in the 70s, before STEM was even STEM. So I understand what you're saying to a large extent in terms of the challenge, especially as a woman. But what I'm interested in, and I've also had international finance background, and I was an investment banker, right, on Wall Street. It seems to me, yes, going into the schools, I'm involved and on advisor to several organizations dealing with youth. But when you start talking about curricula, a lot of the curricula in our states are controlled by state legislatures, by local groups. And so while it is useful to go to schools to work with teachers, which I'm doing. I went to an all-girls school, which is very high academic, and I'm their STEM ambassador. At the end of the day, teachers are being held to the requirements that are being set elsewhere, right? So they have some leeway, but it's being set elsewhere. And so what would you say in terms of, and how have you dealt with the local, the state level education challenges for STEM? Because that's a real challenge, not only in terms of what teachers can teach, but budgets. That's my question.
Absolutely. First of all, round of applause to you, Oren. What an incredible and empowering question. You have obviously a very, very well-rounded knowledge base in this field. Hats off to you. And thank you for asking an important question. So I will speak to a bit of a personal perspective, and then I'll give maybe a little bit of advice on to how we can change this framework. So when I first got into STEM, I was homeschooled. I was in the standard kind of like education curricula for many years, going to public school, and I was very much restricted in my ability to do certain things because I was adhering to the legislative policies that teachers had to teach. I had the opportunity of doing a few years of homeschooling where I got to see kind of a different side of the equation. And in that time, I got to focus a little bit more on what I wanted to learn when it came to science, like still following the textbook, still taking the exams. But for side projects, I was able to kind of pick and choose a little bit about what I wanted to focus on. How I might recommend that teachers can start to change that framework. And we can talk about lobbying, we can talk about going to your local MP or your local member of Congress and trying to, break down those barriers through lobbying and having discussions with government. That is one avenue, and it's an important one that we cannot ignore. However, the other area of this equation is literally live in the classroom. I believe there is, though limited, a degree of flexibility in which teachers can foster greater innovation and participation. How we might look to do that is usually on average, and again, this might not be for every school out there, but on average, there are the exception of 1 to 2 freestyle science projects that are allowed in high school or middle school. So that allows teachers to actually shape their own kind of custom curricula. What they might do that way is, if you have the opportunity to kind of make your own project for students, is to actually survey the students and understand what their interests are, and then try to build a learning project around that and invite subject matter experts within the STEM field that have an interest in that field or they work in that area of research to become part of that conversation, come into the school, give a presentation about, some resources that these students can use to become part of that conversation. Again, it's such a challenge on the state level, on the national level. I know myself personally, I was fortunate to be able to give some impact to Congress recently about how the aerospace engineering curricula for post-secondary students within the United States was being developed. And in that conversation, we actually talked a lot with Congress specifically about youth in STEM. And one of the key takeaways, and this is something that I think is becoming more commonplace in government, but there's never enough advocacy for it, there's always room to grow and improve, is to have direct opportunities for students to have internships and work experience and open resource tools. So in my presentation, I talked about integrating government, academia, and private industry. I feel that it's becoming a little bit more commonplace within legislation, but it needs to be lobbied even more. Having students who are as young as high school and going into even post-secondary, giving them the opportunity to work directly with a business and apply it towards academic credits in their research area of interest allows them to really hone in and focus on what they want to learn. That's one avenue to pursue. If you're talking about younger students, then yes, I do believe that you're fairly restricted. And the best that you can do is to engage them in as many opportunities as you can fulfill as an individual teacher or educator, and give them that chance through assignments that you're able to make as flexible as possible if you have the opportunity to listen to your student body and give them a project around what they seem to be interested in, then I highly encourage that. But just as a close, I think it's a very important conversation to have. I think it's one that we need to have more. And at the end of the day, the only thing that we can do as individuals is the best that we can. And then in turn, what we can do is we can be stewards to our local and national legislation. We can go to organizations like the United Nations and see, how they're working with federal governments, for example, to foster better STEM education and how those principles can be reintegrated back into our local schools. I think it's a matter of communication and lobbying. At the end of the day, it's just going to come back to lobbying and being persistent and being motivated and having perseverance, much like the youth of today. It is our responsibility as STEM professionals to have that same motivation and perseverance to fight for them. So thank you so much for your question.
Anyone else like to contribute here? Please jump in. It's always great to hear new things.
Okay, I have a Ron, I'll have a follow-up. You know me and ORT, so
yeah.
I agree with everything you said in terms of the flexibility to the extent that the teachers, if they have that flexibility, being able to do it. But it seems to me, and I too have been on the Hill lobbying on the federal side, not on the state side, but on the federal side, is that legislators, there's two things that are going to motivate them, it seems to me. One is that their constituency, that is those voters, right, are going to make it clear that for their children's future, this is something that they want to be included. Now, how does one, and I'll leave it to you, but there seems to be that lack or that gap in terms of the legislators being driven by their constituents for what is needed, one. And two, how do I put this? The reason that Ron's and my generation were so inspired and mentored and opportunities were there is because, quite honestly, there was a space race. Sputnik went up and the US said, oh, darn, we've got to do something. And Kennedy's speech in Texas was one of the things that opened people's eyes. As long as there isn't a challenge, a national challenge that is well articulated to the Hill, because there's lots of demands on budgets, right?
Yep.
And so unless that is well articulated and they can go back and sell it to their constituents, that this is something we need to do instead of the road connecting to these two towns, or instead of a new mall, right? Or instead of the other options, it seems to me that we are somewhat in, and budgets are going down, right? Even the request from the President of the United States budget was lower than it was last year. And Congress has cut that even, right? So the options are financially are relatively limited, unless you want to jump into DOD, which nobody right now is going to do. It's those two vectors, the Hill. One, what's the challenge to the national interest for this? And two, that the constituents want it.
Mm-hmm.
How have you, or what are some of your suggestions? Or do you agree? First of all, do you agree that that's to me, that's a major challenge as somebody who's been in the government, who's been in space, do you agree that what I'm observing is really what is happening? And if so, how do you get the constituents to be more vocal in light of all the other demands, healthcare and Social Security and housing, et cetera, that both state and federal are dealing with? And how do you get the legislators, state or federal, to recognize that this is a national security issue. That's not going to say anymore. As I always say on ORT, Ron, I'm not saying another word.
Thanks, Roy. And yeah, just to note, we're just a couple minutes over our finish time. Well, there's a 15-minute break till the next session, so we can go a few more minutes. But yeah, Madison.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Oren, and thank you, Ron, for the heads up about the time. I would love to spend an hour talking about this, honestly, because it's such an important part of this conversation that, yeah, it was kind of left out here. So thank you for bringing that up. I love how politics is kind of becoming part of the conversation because it's an important thing to marry the concepts of what's going on in government versus what we can actually do for youth in STEM. And I think it's a really delicate balance. There are so many different things that the budget needs to go towards. And, you know, we're all sitting there and trying to think, okay, what's the bigger priority here? Is it building roadways? Is it improving hospitals? And then as a result, STEM opportunities get put on the back burner. And to some extent, that makes sense. And you have to be able to appreciate in some context that we can't always be number one on the radar of the government. And difficult as that is, as much as we don't want that to be true, it's an unfortunate fact of life. There is not enough money in any federal budget of any government that allows us to do what we want. First of all, I'm going to say, yes, I agree wholeheartedly with this perspective. I think that it comes down to the constituents whispering in the ears of politicians that are deciding what's the most important thing to get funded. And unless there is a resounding kind of confirmation that youth in STEM is the thing that we should focus our budget on, it's not going to be there at all. It's not going to be in the fiscal plan, or it's going to be written in some fine print at the very bottom of the budget, and that is not acceptable. Now, I understand, and I greatly, greatly appreciate, because I've been on the government side, I've been on the private entrepreneur side, fighting for funding, fighting for youth inclusivity in STEM, but also on the government side, trying to like analyze what's going on in the budget relative to the science sector and where are we finding our pitfalls and why. It's because of the fact that legislative policy is principally, it's a mess. There's no delicate way of stating this, and I will keep it G-rated because this is a professional consortium here. There's, I think, a few things that could be said about politics and how things are going, especially in the United States right now, that are less than satisfactory to how we believe it should be run. But I think at the core of this conversation, and there's no simple way to really wrap up these concepts because it's a much, much more detailed and in-depth conversation that you have to have, is let's stop for a second and think, okay, what is that budget being allocated towards right now? Thankfully, this is usually public information. You can find it online. You can take a look at, okay, what is the president and his parliament, forgive me, I'm Canadian, so I don't know the proper term here. What is his Congress, rather, using this funding towards? Why are they allocating it in this manner? Who's telling them to do so? It comes back to what I like to call political pillow talk, where members of Congress, parliamentarians are having conversations about, okay, what's gonna best suit my agenda? What's gonna best suit my family's agenda? How can I make myself look good in my community? And that is the absolute worst thing that we could be doing in our government. That is the worst thing you can do, is to make it a personal mission. What you should be doing if you're in politics, especially if you're in a STEM side of politics and you're trying to advocate for greater science funding, is really understanding, what do the people want? The only way we can figure this out is just not only through voting and hearing the opinions of others, but doing public surveys, going out there, engaging with the community. I think maybe some parts of my presentation were talking about as people in STEM to engage with youth. Same thing goes for politicians engaging with the STEM community and also engaging with youth, figuring out what needs to be done here? What do people want? So that when we do get down to allocating that budget every fiscal year, and we're looking at, what problems can be solved with what funding we have, granted, it's going to be limited in our capacity to be able to perform and to be able to give as much of this funding out as possible to our schools and to all of these organizations that want to have STEM, to government organizations like NASA, for example, who are dealing with budget cuts, and JPL having like almost 10% of their staff cut in the last year. It is absolutely crazy to think that this is where we are right now in this field, at this burgeoning field where we're trying to grow the industry, but at the same time, we're being cut off at the knees by budget. So I will wrap this up. And again, this warrants a much longer conversation, and something that we can all take heed of is, in order for us to effectively maybe break down some of those barriers or improve how we're working with government or how government is working with us, is let's stop and think, what are our priorities as leaders in STEM? What do we think that we can get done with the budget that we have? Again, when we're talking about budgets, we can lobby all day long about, there needs to be more science funding, and I do sincerely hope that there is. I hope that inflation takes a downward spiral, because we really need it. I know post-COVID, the world has a much more negative outlook on finances, especially where government is concerned. But coming back to prioritization, I believe that infrastructure and healthcare will always be priority number one, as they most likely should be. But when it comes down to STEM and creating opportunities based on funding, we need to sit down and have an open discussion with Congress that says, what can we do with the resources that we have? And that is not a simple decision to make. It's not one that's going to fulfill and please everybody. But as advocates within our professional industries, it is the very least that we can do, is to prioritize and work with each other to the best of our abilities, work with government, and figure out what we can do with what we're given. And always, 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 one key takeaway: keep advocating for change. Never stop the mindset that we can't do this better, because we can. There's always room for improvement. So I will leave it there. Thank you for that question, Oren.
Yeah, here on that. Don't assume that's because that's this some certain way is always the way that things have been done, that it can't be done differently. So cheers. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you. And check back in on the main room, and we'll have another session starting here in room 4 in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much, Madison. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you,
Yeah,
everybody who
cheers.
took the time to listen. I appreciate your time so much.